Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content, and we do have a comment to read from one of our shorts that we did, I think, a couple of weeks ago on the Lakers, and the comment is from Layden Hayton 4283 on YouTube, and he said it's been over for the Lakers ever since LeBron has arrived on the scene. I have to strongly disagree with that statement. I think the recent years haven't looked too good, but you don't get that ring and you don't get AD on the team without LeBron. So I think, I completely disagree. I think, it's just been a bad few years. And I don't think that's from the fault of LeBron. I think it's more so probably the fault of the front office and just having an incompetent team surrounding two of the best players in the NBA. But that's kind of just my short take on that.
Yeah, I'm with you there where it's like, yeah, because I mean, again, before LeBron joined the Lakers, there was no star that was, going to come there, right? I mean, no star had been there since Kobe had left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even when Kobe was there by the end of his career because of the injuries, guys weren't joining. And then he did, right? And like you said, they got the title out of that. And, they weren't going to win a title every single year, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that's where that comes from on it. And I think part of it is because, like you said, the Lakers have had a few bad seasons recently. Right now, some of the kind of the, I guess, more cynical critics have started to come out, right, and started kind of like blaming some of the other spots, which, like, yeah, maybe if you want, you can pin some of the blame on the Stars in terms of the Westbrook decision. But at the end of the day, right, the front office and the ownership, the leadership starts at the top, right? So when you have that situation going on there, that's kind of where you have to primarily look at, right? Like everybody has some level of blame in there, but it's just it's definitely tough, but I don't agree with that at all personally.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, you don't get a title and you're not a relevant franchise pretty much if he's not there. I know there's still a huge brand, but people wouldn't be talking about them quite as much the way that they
100%. I agree. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we're moving on through the NBA Cup. We're almost here. We're almost at the end. We had a few great Cup games over the weekend or over the course of the week. First, you had the first day, right, where you had OKC and Dallas. You had Milwaukee and Orlando, right? Milwaukee ended up beating Orlando 114-109. Now, obviously, this was the shorthanded Orlando Magic, right? No Franz, no Paolo going against the Milwaukee Bucks. And hey, the Orlando Magic for a decent chunk of the game were playing very well, despite the fact that, again, they're down their two best players. Part of that was Jalen Suggs just playing like a monster, right? He had 32 points. And he was kind of the key cog with the Magic when they got the win over the Suns previously. You look around Goga Batazde with a double-double, 12 points, 14 rebounds, just kind of filling in. Him and Wendell Carter Jr. together, right? They've kind of been starting that big man tandem. Tristan Da Silva starting, Anthony Black off the bench. So, obviously this is more so focused on Milwaukee, right? But, in terms of the Bucks, I mean, again, they've been playing very well as of late. They've been, pretty good in terms of on both ends of the floor. I think you're kind of seeing Doc Rivers and the coaching staff kind of like figure out a lot of, a lot of things in terms of the rotation as well. Like say a guy like a Pat Connaughton used to play, isn't playing at all. Even like a MarJon Beauchamp, right? He was part of the rotation for a little while last season. I think DeLon right now has basically been nixed from the rotation. And it's basically, outside of, I guess Andre Jackson Jr., right? Pretty much the only other guys that they're playing at that guard swing spot are shooters, right? Like Taurean Prince, who only played 20 minutes and only took one shot, didn't make it, but he had been leading the league in three-point percentage, right? Gary Trent Jr. off the bench. AJ Green, also known as Derry Bird, interestingly enough. He's come in. He plays a lot. Bobby Portis now kind of looks more like himself compared to earlier in the season. Lopez is still a little up and down, but by and large, I think like what we've talked about with the Bucks is they look better, right? They look like a much more serious team, a much more competent team. Do you expect them to come out of the Eastern Conference and represent them in the finals? Not necessarily, but I think, again, as we've talked about, it is good to see that they're avoiding what was looking like a disaster, right, earlier in the season when they were just losing games to bad teams left and right. Like, and they almost lost this game. I mean, obviously with the cup factor, both teams are playing hard, right? Harder than maybe you might expect from a typical regular season game. But, I think from the Bucks, you're pretty pleased with how they've been playing as of late. Obviously, they go back to Vegas like they did last year, right? We'll see what they can do this time around. And then from the Magic perspective, you're just happy that they competed despite being so shorthanded. And, you're kind of leaving that game feeling like, wow, if Franz and Paolo, come back and they play at the level that they were playing at before they got hurt, this could be one of those sleeper teams in the East where not that you expect them to come out, but, kind of like what we were talking about before the season started, where if those two guys are basically all-star, all-NBA level guys, right, then they have a much better chance at being able to make some type of run compared to if they're about what they were last season. And before they got hurt, they were both playing the best basketball of their careers, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, valiant effort, I think, from the Orlando Magic to even make this game really competitive like that. But yeah, Milwaukee continues to kind of, show that they've turned things around somewhat. Giannis being on a tear offensively still. Dame also, being a great complimentary guy to him. And then the other guys kind of filling in here and there. Still not super confident, like you said, about them, coming out of the East and representing. But regardless, it looks better. And I think that's all that really matters because they're not, in the negative territory. They're above 500 now, which is good. And we thought that they would pick things up. It's just when you have a slow start, that's not a good sign, for the latter part of the season because that stuff will come back to bite you, especially in the postseason. So, good that they're healthy, good that they're winning games. And yeah, it's good that they're moving on in the cup.
Yeah, and the Middleton piece is the X factor there because he's come back and has only played in a few games. Obviously, they're working him back into playing shape. So that's the other factor where if he can get closer to looking more like himself, then that obviously can raise the ceiling, right? Because then it's not say some of the other guys starting. It's Chris Middleton and a good version of him potentially, and that can help with the bench and the second unit. So I feel like they still probably will need another guy. I just don't necessarily know when or where they're going to get it from, right? But like, you look at Pat Connaughton, like I said, that's kind of the glaring piece right now. I'm a little surprised that DeLon Wright just like hasn't really panned out like that, just because of the fact that he was pretty solid, I think, for the Heat, in the stretch that he played. I know he was with the Wizards initially. But either way, it's a little surprising because you would think like he's like a 3-and-D guard. He's like a decent outside shooter, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't really worked with him where, he went from, playing and being a regular piece of the rotation. I mean, like, I guess like he still kind of plays and maybe that one was just like an injury, but I feel like I haven't seen him do quite as much. But maybe it's just me because like, he's played 18 games, right? And the the Bucks are like what, 13 and 11. So, I mean, has he been hurt? But then you look at his stats and like he's shooting 32 from the field and 28 from three. So like it's just, I guess he just hasn't been good, and that's
Yeah.
the part that I think is unfortunate because I think you were hoping to get more out of him. But like, is he the reason why they were playing so badly initially? Like, no. But clearly they still need some additional, I think, 3-and-D pieces because I think we know and understand that like for Giannis he's been more optimized now because of the fact that they have more legitimate shooting out there. So that helps him. And then obviously the Lillard and Dame piece is still kind of growing. But, they just need some more support pieces. But either way, I still don't really feel confident, like I said, about them coming out of the East. But which is disappointing, right? Because that's not what you would want from this group. You would want this group to be a contender. And it's not that they can't get there. It's just, again, do I see them being able to beat Boston 4 out of 7 times? I personally just don't see it, right? Maybe with the way Giannis is playing, maybe they could get to number 2 or 3, because the Cavs have been great consistently this season, right? In a way that the Bucks have just started now to play well, right? But like then you look at the Bucks and they have Giannis, right, who'd be the best player, on the floor, compared to some of these other teams. So like do they have more of a shot than maybe we're giving them? Or is it more so just like they're probably, fine, but just not good enough.
Um, I think it's the latter part. I think they're okay. My opinion on them hasn't really changed from the offseason. I know we caught up a little bit of flack for our takes on them, but overall, it has nothing to do with Giannis, nothing to do with Dame. Like I said, it's really the supporting cast. I don't know how viable they're going to be in the postseason because of age, health, durability, all that stuff. Like,
Right.
you might get the version of like Gary Trent where, he goes off and has like a great shooting night, or you might get the version of him where it is clear and evident where his defense has taken a step back and, he's not hitting his shots either. And I think that could hurt you as well. DeLon Wright not playing, that's interesting because I guess you found better minutes in Andre Jackson Jr., even though their stats are, not super duper different. But I guess, having the youth and more drive, I guess, helps. But,
Yeah.
they're,
Defense up.
yeah, they're not super deep. I think you need Chris Middleton to be playing, like the year they won the championship. But I think that's a long shot because I think, that's an age gone by, if you want me to be honest. So, I don't have a whole lot of faith in a bench, that consists of Bobby Portis, Gary Trent Jr., and AJ Green with a bunch of other guys that DMP every night.
Yeah, Trent, now on the season is shooting 40% from 3.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like earlier in the season, right, that was kind of where the struggles primarily
Yeah.
were, right? And that was when he was starting. But
Yeah.
now he comes off the bench, which is a better role for him. Like, I don't really feel like he's a starting shooting guard, but, at the same time, it is tough, right? Because that's a guy that I think they were banking on. But again, at least he's contributing. Right. And that's kind of at least what you want. You have contributors. It's just like you said, you need more. Because even the Celtics, right? People look at the starting 5, but they do have good depth. Like, they have guys coming off the bench that are producing, right? Like, the Bucks don't have like a Peyton Pritchard level guy coming off the bench, right? Where you can kind of just turn to them for, some good offense, right? Because like Pritchard now, has expanded his offensive game, right? Where they can actually run some offense through him. Whereas the guys coming off the bench for the Bucks, like, they are good shooters and they help, like, say, with the units, especially like, say, if Giannis is off the floor but Lillard's out there with the other guys, and they can play with Giannis too. But either way, good win for the Bucks. Looked like they might lose, but they were able to kind of close it out. And I know the Magic, like, I'm sure they're disappointed that they lost, but they do get some rest, and that's kind of the vibe that, like, we're getting with a lot of these cup games in terms of these teams that have been knocked out recently, where it seems like teams or fans are kind of glad that they lost so like they can get some rest. Like, what they have wanted them to go to Vegas, yeah, but now they get some time to rest. Looking at this other game, OKC Dallas. I mean, OKC just wrecked the Mavs, 118-104. At different points, the Thunder were up 20, and with the Thunder, primarily it's their defense, as we've talked about. They're essentially the number 1 defense in the NBA. Now they have Hartenstein, so now they have more size and rebounding with him. He's had a double-double in almost every game he's played in, playing great for them. SGA leading the way with 39 and 8, right? Including 5 of 9 from 3. He's been taking more threes this year, getting contributions from pretty much everybody. And even in this game, they shot 20 of 50 from 3 because they hadn't been shooting threes that well this season. The Mavs kind of tried to make it a game late, but just didn't have enough. Luka was 5 for 15. I think at one point in the game, Luka had like 2 points through the first, half or whatever. It was a pretty rough game for him in a relatively quiet game. Honestly, for both guards, right? Like, I think Clay ended up being their leading scorer along with Najee Marshall. So that's just probably not going to get it done. And it just kind of continues to illustrate why this OKC team feels like the favorite in the Western Conference right now, because of the fact that they have an elite defense, but then they also have a top 5 guy that they can turn to pretty much whenever they want. Then you have other supporting guys around him. And again, Chet Holmgren isn't even back yet, right? Because that's the guy that presumably when he comes back in, he'll be their starting center, their rim protector again. You'll be able to kind of have lineups where you can mix and match him with Hartenstein. You still have 3-point shooting. You'll have even more size. So, I mean, pretty much there's a lot to like about this team. It's just a matter of, are they going to be able to do it this year? But right now they feel as well positioned as anybody. They're 19-5, 10-2 at home. I mean, SGA, I feel like there should be some MVP considerations for him as well. Honestly, I know Jokic is kind of viewed as the odds-on favorite. I know there's a couple other guys next to him as well, like Giannis and Tatum. But, for SGA, if OKC continues to win at this pace, right, like, I don't see why he shouldn't, be in the discussion for it, if not get it, in my opinion. But the main thing for OKC is that they're playing incredibly well. All their guys are checking the right boxes, ton of depth. Now Caruso's back, he's healthy, so he's helping out on the defensive end. You're just kind of waiting on Chet Holmgren, and then you're waiting for them to take off. And even without him, they've still been taken off because again, they've only lost 5 games.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you in terms of the Shea take. You know, for him to kind of increase his 3-point volume as well and still relatively be shooting the same percentage as last
Mhm.
year is also a really good sign. And I think that definitely is somewhat of a catalyst for, the MVP conversation as well. He's averaging, 30. So, the guy is still a baller. And, as a unit, they've also impressed me a lot as well. Kind of going back to what we talked about in the offseason, like we knew that this defense was going to be tenacious. Now they don't just have, bullies. They have, skinny guys as well, pests. They have everybody. And any type of, defense that you could ask for, they have it covered pretty much on the
Yeah.
interior and perimeter. And I think you can clearly tell that it bothered the Mavericks throughout the entire game. Like you said, Luka played like complete crap. But the OKC, they had, that home field advantage or home court advantage is something serious as well. So they treated it like a playoff game. You could tell in the rotation, they didn't go too deep in the bag until they really needed to. But, having a guy like Alex Caruso come off the bench, Isaiah Joe, like all these guys are really good at defense, and they know their role. And this is without Chet, like you said. So really no surprise here. I would have liked if it was a more competitive game, but regardless, I think a lot of people, almost everybody, was going to pick the Oklahoma City Thunder just because of what they've been doing this season. They're much better than last year.
Yeah, 12 steals a game for the
Yeah.
team, right? That's far and away number one. They're fourth in blocks, 6.4 a game. Rebounding wise, they're not as bad as they were last season, right? Because I believe they were the worst rebounding team in the league last year. This time around, they're 15th, and again, that's without their full, the combination. We haven't seen Chet and Hartenstein in the same game yet, so maybe that will get better, or it should get better, I would think. So that's kind of the cool thing about Oklahoma City is like you said, because say last season they didn't have like a super big physical lineup to turn to, right? They have physical guys, but you didn't say like last season against the Mavs in that series, right? They were getting they were getting bullied. They were getting punished around the basket, right? Like
Yeah.
Dallas's bigs, both Gafford and Lively were just kind of just eating them alive on the boards, crushing them inside. And then obviously the other swing piece was the PJ Washington part, right? He didn't play in that game, but obviously Chet Holmgren didn't play in this game either. So and that was kind of part of it, right? It was like the rebounding, the bigs inside play, and then PJ Washington and even Derek Jones Jr. Right, he had a couple of games where he just kind of went where those guys, and that's going to happen in the postseason where you're going to have a series where guys are going to go hot in one series and then go cold in another series, right? That's kind of the case for the postseason every year, right? It always happens. But I think for OKC, the fact now that you do have that size part, like you said, now you can throw out multiple different types of lineups. You don't only have the option to play small or just play with Chet and like Chet's your only big. Right now you
Yeah.
can do other things. So that's the cool piece about this team. And I just, right now I don't see a team that I feel like is right there with Oklahoma City. I mean, obviously we'll see. But Dallas, I mean, they've been up until that point they had been playing very well. I mean, but prior to this game, they had won 7 in a row. And I mean, even then, I mean, they had just in the last 10, 12 games they've been playing really good. It's just OKC feels like that they're better now compared to what they were last season. But in terms of Dallas, right, is there anything, like this was a bad game by the Mavs, like in a stretch where they've been playing really well. Obviously now they're fourth in the Western Conference, but I still feel pretty good about the Mavs, like just from the perspective of, Luka and Kyrie still seem fine. Washington before, yeah, I think they've had some illnesses going on, and that's why some of these guys have been out. But Washington's been playing well in terms of the defense. Najee Marshall's been playing well. Grimes has been solid. So I feel like this team has been playing pretty well. Like, do the Mavs feel like is there a case to be made that maybe they're the number two right behind Oklahoma City? Is it still kind of TBD? Maybe there's another team we're overlooking, because Dallas seems like they're really good. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I don't feel like they're quite as good as Oklahoma City, but it feels like they might be second. But maybe that might just be recency bias. But I feel like they're playing about at the level of what I was expecting to see from them compared to earlier in the season where they were really struggling because of the fact that they have more pieces now, and I think those pieces are starting to fit in.
Yeah, I would say they're almost a guaranteed lock for number two.
Okay.
For me personally, I think right now they're on a really good run, or they were on a good run up until, the cup game. But I think because I think I like what I've seen from a lot of the guys that they brought in, and then obviously the guys who are returning. Like once again, I continue to sing Kyrie's praises. I think Clay has
Hmm.
been doing a serviceable job. Not elite by any means, but he's just really been out there doing what they kind of need him to do, pretty much the bare minimum, which I think is solid enough because it's kind of rare to get that from certain people. Quentin Grimes, like all the additions have been really solid, I think. So yeah, I would say they have like a sneaky amount of depth, like like looking around, like who's in that range. Like I'm higher on the Mavs than I am the Warriors, Clippers,
Hmm.
probably Memphis as well, and probably
Okay.
Houston as well. Just because I think Houston lacks the experience. I know they seem to be a great regular season team, but I think Dallas has that, edge of they've been to the finals. They had an amazing postseason run last year, so they know what it takes to get there. But I think they need to figure out what it takes to get the job done. So I think that's kind of like the category they fall into. But yeah, I would say they're probably better than Memphis and Houston. So
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of there too. Memphis has been playing pretty well. I think they're one of the only teams that's top five on both ends of the
hmm
floor, right?
hmm
Because they're top five on offense and defense. So, and they have a ton of depth. We just haven't seen enough games like with all their guys, and
yeah,
that's been the problem for them is they have not been able to stay healthy. When they are healthy and whole, it feels like they're really good and they're kind of back to where they were looking like they were heading towards right before they had that first round loss to LA. But yeah, like with the Mavs, I think the Luka Kyrie factor and the depth and defense around them. It's just again, there are times where you do feel a little concerned where it's like, okay, that in that game, who's guarding SGA?
Mhm.
Because like it's not Luka, it's not Kyrie, and it's probably not Clay either, right? Like maybe when he's not sick, like PJ Washington. I guess
Mhm.
maybe that's the guy you turn to, but that's kind of the concern with Dallas, where just in general, right? There's going to be times where I think it may be a little bit tough to kind of figure out who's the next guy next to them that you're going to put on, the other team's opposing guard, just because. I don't think you can ask Luka and Kyrie to do that because that's not, like they can compete at times, but you still don't really want them on those guys in crunch time.
Yeah,
Whereas
agreed.
like with OKC, like we know who they're gonna stick on each guy, and even like SGA is like a really good, defensive guard,
hmm
right? Like consider him a two-way guard, I
Yeah,
think, in my opinion. So,
100%.
then you move on to the second group of NBA Cup games, right? You have the Knicks and the Hawks, and then you have the Warriors and the Rockets. So we'll start with the Knicks and the Hawks. This one was a game where I think it was kind of a tale of, I guess, two halves, more so like one quarter, right? Because the Knicks had the edge in the first half, right? In the first half, it was 54 47, right? So the Knicks, like in the first half, and they've been like the number one offense, right? So they've been playing, pretty well. And then in the second half, they just kind of in that third quarter just kind of fell apart, right? Where like Atlanta just completely shut down the Knicks offense. They only had 18 points. Dyson Daniels basically took Jalen Brunson out of the game. He had 14 points, 5 of 15, and a handful of those buckets came late, like when the game was pretty much over. So even then, like, I mean, he was basically holding him to some of his lowest offensive production. I mean, Hart was fine. Ananobi was 5 for 17, but, he does his normal thing on the defensive end. But just in general, like you continue to be impressed by the way that the Hawks play. Trae Young had 22 and 11, 8 for 22, but was a +6, right? But, I think the big star of this game was Jalen Johnson for Atlanta, where he's been great this season and, was kind of a guy that was the guy that the Hawks said, other than Trae Young, he's the only other untouchable, right? And he's basically shown why he's an untouchable guy this season. I mean, when you look at the numbers, that he's been putting up, I mean, he's giving you basically 20 points and 10 rebounds a game, to go on 50 from the field and 35 from three and over a steal and a block a game. So he's, a guy that's getting it done on both ends. Also, just under 6 assists a game. So the playmaking is the other piece that is really starting to set him apart. As a forward, you got Reese Shea, who was 1 for 8 with 2 points. But it's okay because DeAndre Hunter comes off the bench, right? And he's been having a pretty good season this year, right? As kind of like the 6-man offensive wing, right? He had 24, 1 rebound, no assists, right? But again, he was hitting his shots. Bogdanovich, Okongwu, Dyson Daniels, obviously we already mentioned him, and we mentioned him when we talked about the Hawks in our previous episode, right? So there's a lot to like about this team, as we've talked about, and they've continued to kind of grow on us. I think because going into the season, I think both you and I were not super high on this team. And I think most people were kind of a little bit down on the return that they got in the DeJounte Murray trade, but I think it was just because I don't think people expected Dyson Daniels to pop off as much as he has in this season, and him being that good, completely makes that, completely kind of shifts how people view that trade now, because now it feels like you're looking at more people saying that Atlanta might have won the trade. They get the Lakers draft pick this year. We'll see where that lands. But, obviously for New Orleans, a big part of that is it's been such a disastrous season for them in terms of injuries. But, Trae Young is back, essentially, right? In terms of like his team, right? Because the last couple of seasons, the Hawks have been pretty disappointing, where they had DeJounte Murray, they go all in and make what seems like a big move, and then it just doesn't pan out. But, again, we talked about it at the time. You give them credit for realizing that this isn't working. We got to figure out a way to move on. And they got back a piece that seems like it's a better fit, right? Where again, you got basically what you were hoping to get out of DeJounte Murray, but it's in a guy that's younger, is going to cost you less. He's even bigger, right? Because Dyson Daniels is what, 6'7", 6'8", or whatever. So you basically have 3 forward size guys in the starting 5, and they're starting to kind of really put some things together now. Like obviously, I still wouldn't probably call it like an elite basketball team, but they seem like they're good, right? They've gone on a run where, they've gone on a stretch of pretty high quality basketball, right? Like they are 7-3 in their last 10. They're 14-12. So they're right around that play-in spot with the chance to possibly move up. Maybe it might be a little bit tough because I feel like the other teams around them are still good. But either way, the fact that, you remove the guy like DeJounte Murray and then you haven't really missed a beat, and now it seems like you have what's still seemingly a solid core. You got to feel good about this group if you're Atlanta, right? Again, I don't view it as like a quote unquote championship team, but again, you re-sign Jalen Johnson to an extension. He's been playing great and reaping the benefit, and you're reaping the benefits of that. And again, you got this core of big athletic wings next to Trae Young, right, to kind of help flank, your defensive group there, right? You still have Capella, and then you got Okongwu coming in, right, as a backup big, but also closing. So I like this group, honestly, and I think I gotta admit, like I think I was wrong about the Atlanta Hawks, where we picked the under for them, and they are pretty poised to hit that, because they're already halfway there, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think I expected the Hawks to look like this maybe a season from now, with another offseason under their belt, multiple additions. But, Dyson Daniels looking the way that he's looked, and then Jalen Johnson, coming to fruition. I thought that he was more of like a long-term project kind of guy. But then, to be honest, it is year 4 for him. But still, I didn't expect him to take a leap like this where, the efficiency and everything has, gone up. And then obviously Trae Young not really losing a step as well, playmaking, and then like you already talked about, the wings just playing out of their mind. So, all in all, great effort from them as well. Like Trae Young continues to terrorize the Knicks, but I think this game, I think it kind of shows you that they do have potential to get back into the swing of things, to get back to the playoffs or play-in, whatever. And yeah, it looks like a W season for them because, like you said, I think you and I both were like, yeah, no, this team's garbage. But lo and behold, they're playing pretty well.
Kind of wild, and it's kind of wild when you look at the fact that Trae Young is averaging 21 and 12, so he's leading the league in assists, but he's only shooting 38% from the field.
Yeah, it's bad.
And 31% from 3, so he's not even having like an efficient season.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still able to win because him plus the guys around him, and obviously he can set the table for them. And again, it's just kind of surprising because usually in the past, right, like he had to put up crazier stats, just for them to kind of win, but even then, not necessarily, right? But, now you're seeing a version where it's like, obviously you want him to be more efficient, but you also don't really want a scenario where it's like, yeah, we need you to average like 29 and 10,
Yeah.
just for us to be like a remotely competitive team, right? Like even last season, he was like at 26 and 11, and they weren't very good last season,
Yeah.
with or without him,
Yeah.
right? Then the year before, right, 26 and 10. So that's nice that now you can kind of settle into, a role where I guess the usage is still there, but you don't necessarily need him to go off quite as much scoring because he's a great passer playmaker and he's got a bunch of guys to feed the ball to anyways. And some of these guys can make their own plays too. So
Yeah.
it's not just that like they're quote unquote 3-and-D wings, like they're plus, they're versatile guys, right? Like
Yeah.
Jalen Johnson can do more than just shoot and defend. He can handle the ball and do his own thing on offense, and things like that. And again, they all have good size too. So pretty much like checking all the boxes. It's just a matter of again, how much better can they get this season? Like, could they kind of sneak in and be one of those sleeper teams, kind of like what we were talking about with the Magic, where like maybe they kind of give a first round team a scare, right? And maybe take out somebody.
Mhm.
Or is it more so like just probably still a first round exit, but you feel better about them than you did before?
I think it depends on Trey Young. What does he look like? Does he pop off for a series? I think if he pops off, then yeah, they could easily be one of those spoiler teams. But logically speaking, I think, my heart is telling me that they're probably going to be a first round exit. It's still a great story and definitely something that a lot of people didn't expect. And it's still going to be a great season regardless, I think, of the outcome. As long as they hit that over, I think it's going to be a good season for them.
Yeah, because like in the Eastern Conference, it's looking like you could probably get to like 35 wins and still probably be in the mix, right? Because
Yeah.
again, like as long you got to be somewhere in the top 10, right? And the 10 seed right now is the Bulls, right? Who
Hmm.
are 10 and 15, right? So and it's possible a couple of these teams, like say the Bulls make trades, maybe they don't, right? But they might fall off, right? But the Hawks now seemingly are kind of taking the place of the Pacers, who've just been atrocious this season so far. I mean, it's not looking good for them. But either way, then moving on to the Knicks, right? Like just a bad offensive game, right? And they've been the number one offense, so they were probably due for not a great performance there. But either way, um, I mean, I still think this Knicks team is good. Like they're still pretty good, and I think that you have to take them seriously as a contender. It's just a matter of again, they're still going to need to improve on the defensive end. You're still waiting for Mitchell Robinson. I think Shams put out he's probably not going to be back until like maybe like mid late January if I'm not mistaken.
Mm.
So you got Precious Achua back, so at least you can kind of still have some more lineups with a little bit more size, like because I want to see like a lineup where like in Minnesota where you have Towns next to another center, so it's not just him basically always at the five, right? Because he did that well in Minnesota. So they just don't have that yet, right? So I mean, again, it was not a great performance. It's a very different team from last season, but I still feel like they're in the mix, right? Like maybe like do you feel like they've been a little disappointing, right? Or is it maybe about what you thought, or somewhere in between,
Um,
or better?
I personally for the Knicks, I've been kind of like neutral on it. I mean, I picked them to win the title, but
They've been
you
great.
know, yeah, I mean, like there's things that I love and there's things that I hate. Like defensively, I'm lost for words. I don't even know how that is happening, but offensively, I love everything. I'm gonna chalk this game up, just having a bad night. But regardless, I think if Dyson Daniels and is able to do that to Jalen Brunson, then I think we might have a problem, and nobody else can really elevate and take over in a situation like that. That might be a problem, but I'm not super worried. I know they're 6-4 in their last 10, so not like danger zone, but I mean, I think they're kind of just going through a slight little slump. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the key thing is that Towns has pretty much been everything you could ask for,
Yeah,
and
as
then some.
advertised. Yeah.
Yeah, like he's been great this season. And this is like what we talked about where when we talked about the deal, even though we didn't necessarily like love the deal for either team, I think we did like it more for the Knicks because
Hmm.
of the fact that I think we both felt that Towns is the best player in the deal. He played a position that the Knicks literally did not have. And offensively, it was a lot easier to plug and play and fit him in there. And I think you're seeing the benefits of that with him playing next to Brunson. And Brunson's played well too. Like he had a bad game in this game,
Yeah.
but he's been really good this season. Don't let like like the quote unquote counting stats,
Yeah.
fool
Yeah.
you. Like of course they're going to be lower because he's playing next to another guy that can give you, well over 20 a game. But just in like, I think his passing and playmaking have been really good. That connection, the two-man game
He's more
has been
efficient.
on point. Yeah, exactly. So I don't have any complaints with that. Again, people still, you're still gonna kind of bring up the Bridges thing because like they traded a lot of picks to get him. And Hart and Anunoby have been good. So I just think they still need another piece. Is it Mitchell Robinson? Is it somebody they can grab at the deadline? Is it both? That's probably what they're looking for. But again, I do feel like that the defense is gonna need to be better in order for them to get to where they want to go, right? Just because of the fact that like I feel like it's tough to be, and it's probably maybe if you look at the team stats, maybe it's improved as of late, but they were like what 21st or 22nd or so defensively. It might have changed. I mean, I can easily just check. I mean, yeah, like if you look at defensive rating, the Knicks now are up to 17. So it's gotten better than what it
Hmm.
was previously. It just needs to continue to get better. Can it be somewhere around league average? So like maybe a few more spots up. And if it can, the offense is still, I think it's dropped to 2, but like just barely. Right. So essentially you're talking about it's one of the best offensive teams in the NBA. So if the defense can improve a little bit more, then I think you're fine. Right? Like obviously you're still kind of scared about can you beat the Celtics, but I think you feel good about where you're at, right? And I think that there's room for them to continue to improve, right? Like I don't feel like they're just stuck in neutral and not going anywhere. It's nice that you've got the Towns Brunson part figured out. It's just now it's time to kind of figure out the defense. And I think, like I said, if Robinson comes back or if they can acquire somebody else, then I think that will probably unlock more of what they can do. Because there's still times where it feels like they're just a little bit too small in certain spots. Like in this Hawks game, they were just getting dominated on the boards, right? Where like, I mean, you had multiple possessions where the Hawks were getting like 2, 3, 4 extra chances because of the fact that the Hawks had the length, and athleticism advantage over the Knicks. So I like the guys that are available right now. There's probably not much room to grow there, but I think in terms of the guys that could come in or might be available soon, I think that's where they'll get more of that boost that they're definitely gonna need, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's the bench for me. Really, if I'm gonna be honest, like there's not a lot of defensive guys on the bench. Miles McBride, Cam Payne, Jericho Sims, Precious Achua. Like, that's kind of tough. And when you compare it to the Hawks bench, you kind of have a couple of two-way guys there, that can also do a lot offensively. So, and the Knicks guys, the starters, they need rest. So, when you bring guys in on the bench, it just doesn't help that there's no like defensive stalwart on the bench. So that's kind of my gripe with the Knicks right now.
Yeah. Now we're moving on to the other West game, right? Quarterfinals. Rockets Warriors, right? Going into this game, the Rockets had lost 15 straight to Golden State, right? I know we talked about like that losing stretch, like between like say the Lakers and the Nuggets, or even Golden State, and the Nuggets, but none so much as this, right? Where they prior to this, the Rockets won 91-90. They had not beaten the Golden State Warriors since February of 2020. And that was back when Russell Westbrook and James Harden were on the team together, right? And that was also back when the Warriors were bad, right? So, I mean, because that was the year where Clay was out, Steph had the broken hand injury, D'Lo was there the first stretch of the season, right? They weren't good. Um, but in this game, it was just kind of wild, right? Because you watch the first quarter and the Rockets just basically completely just take Golden State out of their offense. I mean, it was a ton of turnovers, mostly by Draymond, but the Warriors just looked out of it. But even then, as great defensively as the Rockets were playing, they couldn't consistently take, advantage of the turnovers they were generating. So you go to the end of the first quarter, the Rockets are only up 20-18, right? Then in the second quarter, there's a stretch where the Rockets go on a run, again, mostly with their defense. They go up 40-26, right? On an Amen Thompson dunk or whatever. And then the Warriors just quickly cut into the lead, right? Buddy Hield comes in. He's started. Wiggins didn't play in this game, and neither did Moses Moody, right? But he comes in and he hits a few shots. Then Steph kind of heats up, right? And then the game basically gets, about to even, right? Well, no, it was like 44-37. So a very low scoring first half. And again, these are two of the better defensive teams in the NBA. So you knew that you were going to get, more of a defensive oriented game. I mean, the Warriors, I think, were a top 5 offensive team, but they've dropped all the way down to 16, so they've not been good offensively, especially because, they've had more of a negative stretch recently, even though they had a couple of wins here and there. Then the third quarter, the Warriors, have kind of like a classic Warriors third quarter. Guys start heating up. Lindy Waters comes in and does his thing. And then in the fourth, it's back and forth. It looks like the Warriors are going to pull away. And I kind of initially went in assuming the Warriors were going to win, right? Just because of the fact that I feel like that they just match up pretty well with Houston. Houston doesn't necessarily have that 1A guy. But, the Rockets, they fought back. And then, Van Vliet hits the corner 3. Şengün gets the drive. Then you have the possession where Steph, I feel like this possession, I think, was a little bit of not great late game clock management, right? Where I think he takes the shot a little too early. My guess is he wanted to end the game on a 3, right? Just to kind of hit the dagger shot. It misses. Gary Payton gets the offensive rebound. It looks like the Warriors are trying to call a timeout on the other side, but I guess it doesn't go through. And then Payton just throws it away. Jalen Green gets the ball. And then Kuminga just kind of grabs at Jalen Green's shoulder for whatever reason, and they call a foul. Now, there was a lot of talk on social media about should this have been a foul call, right? You don't normally make this call at the end of the game, right? Obviously, Steve Kerr, raised some concerns about the call, right? He said a lot about it. But, obviously the last 2-minute report came out earlier today. We're recording this on Thursday, and they said that actually, no, it was the correct call. And I believe they also mentioned that there was supposed to be like a 5-second violation or whatever, I think, on Podziemski, if I'm not mistaken, right? So they were basically saying like, nope, you guys are wrong. Like, that's not at all what happened. So just kind of an interesting situation there, right? But just in general, for the Rockets, a wild come from behind game, right? Where like I said, I didn't expect them to win this game, and I definitely didn't expect them to pull it out. Once they were in the stretch where it looked like late in the fourth, they were just kind of done because of the fact that we know Houston, their strength is their defense, not so much their offense. But they competed and fought back, and they've kind of made their way to the quarterfinals. And you kind of look at the production there. Again, Alperen Şengün leading the way with 26, 11, and 5 and 3. Generally, he's been like a negative plus minus guy against the Warriors. And part of that is just because I think there are things they can do defensively against him, right? Or offensively against him, where he plays, and I will give him credit. He actually does try to commit. Like, he goes up and he plays super high. He comes up to the point, of the ball handler, basically. Right, he's not like dropped back and basically just kind of like daring people to shoot. So he's doing the right things. He's getting steals, but he can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought he was solid at different points in this game. And then you look around, nobody else had like a crazy offensive performance. I mean, Jabari Smith Jr. had 15. It felt like there were stretches where he should have gotten the ball, but just didn't. Right, like where they would kind of go to him and then just go away from him. Right, where like his shots would just come in like 5-6 point stretches, like in different quarters, right? Dylan Brooks had a couple of solid moments, had a steal, hit a few big shots. Fred VanVleet was 3 for 13, 7 assists, just hasn't shot the ball well this season, right? He hit the big corner 3. Jalen Green had a couple of stretches where in the second quarter, he had a stretch where he had like a dunk, a couple of drives that were, where he was kind of making a personal run. But, then there were other stretches where the shot just wasn't falling. He still finished with a positive plus minus. He had some big rebounds towards the end of the game. And, he had some positive moments. Amen Thompson, right, came in and was just basically like a defensive menace, as we've talked about, right? 6 rebounds, a steal, had a crazy block off the backboard. Tari Eason had 9 and 7. Felt like at different points, I don't know why, I thought he had a different point. He had like a worse game than he actually did. I don't know why, but but I think he came in late, right? Because he had the corner three, so he made some big plays late in the game. He was the guy that was on the sideline, right, talking to the Rockets to try to get him up, right? We know he was a guy last season, right, that had some viral moments.
Yeah.
Um, but either way, it's just kind of wild with Houston because we've talked about it, where they don't really have a guy that you look to as like a superstar. Like Şengün's really good, but he's not like in that superstar tier, right? Probably can't be the number one guy on a really good team. And then, you're hoping it's Jalen Green, but he's just a little bit too up and down, I think. And again, he had his moments in this game that were good, then some moments that were not so good. And it's kind of not really a surprise, like when you hear like different times, like, are they going to go after somebody? Are they not going to go after somebody? But just in general, solid defensive performance all around, right? And in a game where, like I said, I don't think most people expected them to win, but again, they competed their butts off. I mean, both teams played hard, but for Houston, big win for them, right? Because I'm sure this means a lot to them. They get to go to Vegas and have a chance to put their team on the map. They've been playing great this season. They're 17-8, 10-3 at home. The crowd went nuts for them. So again, there are guys that aren't even playing, right? That are, that could potentially be part of this core. But, what Udoka's been able to do with this team has been really impressive. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think we did have an over on the Rockets this season. I don't think it was that significant of an over,
Hmm.
but it looks like they're going to cross that threshold even more than I think we thought. Like, I think they've definitely been significantly better than we expected. I think we thought they were going to be better, but I think we didn't expect him to be this good. And that's without, again, like, a crazy season from Green where, like, I think we were kind of hoping that both him and Şengün would take a step up. And I'm not even saying that Green's been awful. It's just like there's games where he's, just lighting it up. But, even, on this season, he's giving you 19 a game, but only 40% from the field and 32 from three. He is giving them defense, but just in general, again, they've been very impressive, and that's despite like even like a Fred VanVleet hasn't been great this season, right? So it's like that's the other piece where I do kind of wonder, what are they going to do there in terms of moves? But I think they like him there, and again, he's a veteran leader guy, so there's nothing really to complain about if you're a Rockets fan. It's just obviously the offense is going to have to improve, but it's probably not going to improve with the personnel they have. So it's just kind of like, you just keep on trucking, you keep winning games, and just continue to see what you have because they're building something here. And I think it's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, this game kind of was the epitome of how their season has gone, in its entirety. You get some spotty play from Jalen Green. Fred Van Vliet has a mid game. Şengün does his thing offensively. Dylan Brooks shows up on both ends of the floor. Jabari Smith Jr. sometimes looks invisible, but it's those two guys off the bench that scare the heck out of me. It's Tari
Yep.
Eason and Amon Thompson. Defensively, what the heck they can do is just amazing. I mean, if I was on the opposing team, if I was a player on the Warriors, I wouldn't even want to be out there. Like those guys are relentless. So, they're really carrying the load defensively, but overall as a unit and, like you said, there's guys on here that literally could be playing on any other team, in some sort of rotation, like Steven Adams, Cam Whitmore, like guys like that. But, regardless, even Reed Shepard, I think could play. But, regardless, I think they are scrambling to find some offense because it is kind of rough watching this team at times where,
Yeah.
Jalen Green is kind of just out there hoping, throws up a prayer, doesn't go in. Jabari Smith Jr., and then like Dylan Brooks, there's just some people that you probably don't want running the show at times. And I think that's where the whole, Şengün play comes from because he's such a great offensive player and a great maestro. I think you kind of forced to play through him.
Mhm.
Whereas like if you play through Jalen Green, you're gonna get, a semblance and a resemblance of last year. And I don't think you want that. So that's kind of my take on the Rockets. But overall, yeah, it's a good thing that they're going to Vegas because they're young and hungry.
Yeah, and I think with the Rockets, we again like even if Şengün is your best player, you still need like a high level perimeter
Yeah.
guy, regardless. Just because I think even like say with Denver, right? Um, they have Murray, right? Or I guess had. We'll see if he can kind of get back to it. But like they have a guy next to their center, right? Like or Embiid, you got Tyrese Maxey. Like you still need that, even if your best player is your center, because you're just not going to realistically always going to be able to just kind of do that every single time, right? But they don't have it, right? Like, and that's kind of like you said, where it gets a little bit scary because it's like, Fred VanVleet, you're going to be the guy, to kind of take these big shots, right? Maybe it's Jalen Green. Maybe it's Dylan Brooks. Maybe it's Jabari Smith Jr., right? Maybe it's none of them. You don't know. But that is part of, I think, what kind of makes it so fun and entertaining at times too, right? Where it's just like there's a lot of unpredictability, but there's just so much athleticism and just so much length on the team that it doesn't, at times it almost doesn't even matter. Like we know come playoff time, they're going to have some type of creator guy, right? That you can rely on pretty consistently. And that's probably what's going to be their undoing, assuming they continue to play at this level and get into the postseason. But again, the goal for them this season was to be a good team, a competitive team, and build on last season. See what you got with your guys, and then kind of go and move forward, right? And there's some rumors, right, that have come up recently that we're going to talk about relatively soon. That maybe we'll see what happens there. But for the Rockets, it's all smiles. It's all, just kind of applause for what they've been able to do this season. You move over to the Warriors side, right? They dropped to 14-10. They got off to a hot start during the season, right at the beginning of the season, right? They started 12-2. Now they're 3-7 in their last 10, and they just don't look the same anymore, right? Obviously, Wiggins was out in this game. I think they probably would have won if Wiggins had played. Of course, you can always play that game in a lot of situations, but just because of how good he's been by and large, it's just tough because it's like what we talked about going into the season, where you don't have a real number 2 guy you can turn to after Steph, right? Like clearly they're kind of trying to force it to be Kuminga, but I just don't think he's going to be that guy, not for this team, right? Like he was okay, 20 points on 20 shots. He did have some offensive boards, so I'll give him credit for that, but he was also 2 of 6 from the free throw line, right? And in a game where they were clearly not happy with the officiating, and there were some bad calls. I do think bad calls on both sides, right? Like there was a play where Steph got fouled on the jumper, and the ref literally said, "My bad," after he didn't call it. But also, again, kind of hard, right? Because Kuminga, he's a guy that can get to the line a lot because they're trying to force him to be that other guy, but he can't make free throws. And it's kind of hard to have a guy that's biggest strength is attacking the basket, and nobody really cares about if he shoots outside jumpers, and nobody cares if he gets to the free throw line because you can't trust it. Buddy Hield started, right? And he's been fine, right? He had a hot stretch to begin the season, but he's also still a guy that like can't really be your number 2. He's a guy that can play off of others. And then you look at the bench, right? And that's just like that was where the major problem was, right? Like Kevon Looney, Lindy Waters was like the leading bench scorer, right? Who wasn't even, he was fine. I guess he hit his shots, but Trace Jackson Davis, not sure what happened to that guy, right? Where like, he ended up being the starting center for the Warriors last season because Looney was bad, but now Looney, by and large, this season has been better, and he's not been that great. Kyle Anderson randomly plays 4 minutes. Pat Spencer randomly plays 3 minutes. Pods plays 31. Hasn't been good this season. Wasn't as bad in this game maybe as some others, right? He was a +4, but it's just hurting them that they don't have another guy to turn to, beyond Steph consistently, right? And like for him, like they're clearly managing his minutes, right? He's only playing 30 minutes a game. He's, averaging 23, 6.5, and 5, right? And he's still shooting the ball well, but you can kind of tell that there are times where they're kind of like trying to give him a rest, give him a breather, and it's kind of hard to, right? Because like they're just not good when he's not out there consistently, which is not really a shocker because we talked about it. That was what we were concerned about: is where's the offense going to come from outside of Steph consistently every night, and you don't know, right? Like you just don't, and that's kind of the major problem there. And they're kind of forcing these young guys into trying to be guys that I feel like they're just not, right? Where like I don't think any of these, like Kuminga is fine, but I don't think he can be a guy on this team that can be like your other go-to scorer. I just don't think he's good enough at it to be that. And, Wiggins has been good, but I just don't think this team has enough after Steph and Draymond for me to feel like they can be like an actual threat to win the title. Like maybe they could be like a spoiler team in the West, but it's starting to kind of feel like that they kind of need to do something or else they're going to be in danger of falling behind, right? Because like of the three teams ahead of them, like maybe you could say they might be better than the Rockets, but the Rockets seemingly have been able to win more consistently than them. And there's a few teams that are below them where like maybe they might be better, I don't know, but I don't feel like they're quite good enough. And that's clearly why you've heard talks about them exploring trades. But and again, like this one was a tough loss where like you could make the case that they should have won this game, but they didn't. And that's happened for them sometimes in these crunch time games, but it's just a little bit disappointing, right? Because again, like for a lot of these other teams, like, you can kind of clearly see who the number two guy is next to their superstar. But for the Warriors, you really don't. I think we know Draymond is like their second guy, but just not offensively. So that's kind of the problem for them, which again is what we kind of expected going into the season. I think we were just kind of caught off guard by how well they were playing early on, but it feels like now that was more and more of probably just kind of like a mirage.
Yeah, I think they're frauds. That's the simple way to put it. The Warriors, I don't think, like you said, they have not amazed me as of late. You're definitely seeing the struggles of having, a rotation where everybody's going to pretty much play some solid minutes. And, I think the confusion is still evident. And it doesn't help that, Steph, I don't think has been playing, super duper out of his mind. And I think, he can't do it alone. And I'm not saying, it's his fault that the record is what it is and why they're losing a little bit here and there. But yeah, it's clear that a roster change needs to happen. And I think, and I'm going to assume, that a lot of these guys are probably being played a lot because their values probably, needs to be rehabbed a little bit. So, but even then, it's not really working out because a lot of these guys haven't played too well. So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot, in my opinion. But I think they're probably the team that will trade for somebody, but I don't really know who it's gonna be, but we'll see. They
Yeah,
do
'cause,
need to
like,
change some stuff up though, because this isn't
right.
working anymore.
Yeah, because there's been kind of conversations about like, do they trade for say like a Jimmy Butler, right? Do they kind of maybe make like a depth move, right? Where like you kind of swap some guys out and you bring in like the Nets guys, right? Like Schroeder, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, like some combination of those guys. But again, it's just tough, right? Because I think like for the front office, like they clearly banked on I think these young guys being really, really good. And like sometimes that's just not how this works, right? Like, Kaminga was drafted this is fourth season, right?
Hmm.
And like he's gotten better, but he's still not at the level of like, okay, we're ready to kind of hand you the keys and like, you're gonna be, our other go-to guy after Steph. It just doesn't work.
No,
Right. And like and it's not and like at a certain point, it's kind of tough because like, the first two
worse than
seasons he
last
was
year.
and like it's kind of tough because like say the first two seasons he wasn't really playing a whole lot, but that's because they were clearly trying to win and contend. Now you're in a position where now you're forced to play him, and maybe he's not quite as far along as you want him to be because he didn't get those reps early on. And again, I don't think he's like I don't think he's bad. It's just should any of these guys be untouchable? Like I would say absolutely not. It's just a matter of, we talked about it where, maybe they tried to go after Paul George, maybe they tried to go after Markkanen, right? Obviously people, we can, kind of try to figure out like how serious were the other teams in trying to pull off those deals, right? And versus like how willing was Golden State to put those guys in deals, right? Because we kept hearing like they don't want to trade Pods. Maybe they don't want to trade Kaminga. And it's like, well, you didn't trade those guys. You have those guys, and they haven't really produced at the level I think you were hoping for, right? Like Pods,
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. Like he just can't consistently hit jumpers anymore, right? And that's kind of a big part of his game. So just in general, it's just tough because again, like what are you going to get for these guys? And if you want to get a star, you're going to have to give up more than just those guys cuz say like, cuz contractually, if you're trying to get like a 30-40 million dollar star, like you're also probably going to have to put a guy like a Wiggins in the deal, and he's played really well, but I still feel like outside of Steph and Draymond, those are like your two only untouchable guys. But, Wiggins, I don't think you just give up like unless it's for a guy that you feel like is a clear legitimate upgrade, right? Like I don't think you'd give up Wiggins just to like get more depth. I think you'd only give him up if, you're getting a star, but it's tough cuz like how much does the front office and ownership actually believe in the ability of this group to actually realistically contend? That's the other part of it. How easy is it to pull off a trade now in the new era of the CBA, right? There's some first apron issues that they might have. So, like you said, we definitely know that they're going to try to explore some moves. It's just a matter of what's out there. Are they going to do it? And then if they actually pull it off, how successful are they going to be after they pull it off, right? Like, because it feels like this team, I think, is not one move away, but I feel like at least 2 to 3 moves away, and I don't necessarily know if they're going to be able to do that. But I think at the very least, Melton will get moved because he's not going to be coming back this season because of the ACL injury. He makes $12 million. So regardless of what type of deal they pull off, he's going to be in the trade because, there's no point in keeping him because he won't be playing.
Yeah.
But is there anyone, I mean, are any of those guys like, do you feel like you would try to kind of fight to keep? Or is it more so just like send them all?
The only person that is untouchable on that team for me personally is gonna be Steph.
I
I
meant more
think
so like the young
I
guys.
know, but I was gonna get there. Like I think any of those young guys can be moved as long as you get that star that's going to obviously clearly work. I don't want them to get somebody that's not gonna work. So as long as they get like a serviceable second option for Steph, and you give up, some of those young guys, I wouldn't miss them at all.
Yeah, and do you like the other possible alternative of like say like a Nets deal where you're just kind of swapping in and getting maybe some just better quality depth as opposed to these guys that might be not quite as good.
Probably. It depends on who we're talking about from the Warriors' perspective. Like, I don't know, but I would prefer that they get a star over the whole depth thing because I don't want them to get these depth guys and then they're still playing like 13 guys. I don't want that. I want them to get that star.
Right.
That's the only
Yeah.
solution that I could see.
Right. So yeah, and I don't know which path they're gonna take, but I feel like of the teams that like clearly need to do something, I feel like they can at least make a small move. Right.
Yeah.
Like there are some teams where like I don't know if they can realistically do anything, but I think they can at the worst case scenario pull off something like relatively small.
Yeah.
But if it's just one small move, like it's not really gonna matter that much. But I think at the very least you gotta at least find, a spot for Melton. Just so that way you can swap him with a guy that's actually going to play.
Yes.
So now, we're going to be right in that semifinals matchups, right? Where we're going to have, Bucks and we're going to have the Hawks, right? So obviously a rematch, not really, but like, I guess a rematch of two teams that played in the conference finals back in 2021. And obviously the Rockets and the Thunder, they've played, many times over. Those are two young up and coming teams. Who do we think is winning?
Probably the Thunder. I think the Thunder humble the Rockets.
Mhm.
And I think the Bucks beat the Hawks. I don't think the Hawks have anything to really slow down Giannis. I think
Mhm.
Dame is going to be the X factor in that game. But yeah, I think the Thunder humble the Rockets and then the Bucks take out the Hawks.
Yeah, it's tough because like in their previous regular season matchups, right? The Bucks lost to the Hawks in a pretty
Mm-hmm.
convincing fashion, and then
Mm-hmm.
the Rockets ended up beating the Thunder, I believe, in overtime, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, like it's kind of interesting because there are some areas where, like you said, there's some matchup problems, right? So, say like for the Hawks, how in the heck do you slow down Giannis? Even though they do have a bunch of forwards, right? I don't feel like any of those guys are probably going to be capable of stopping him. But then, like if you're Milwaukee, are you going to be able to slow down their offensive guys? I don't necessarily know about that. So that's where I feel like that could be a pretty back and forth matchup. But, like in a situation like that, right, in terms of we know we're going to get a high effort game from both teams, like I feel like I can see the Bucks pulling that out. Um, and then, on the other side, right, like for the Rockets and OKC, really the X factor is like Şengün, right? Can he kind of match up and be like the second best guy on the floor? And then can you kind of win by committee, right? Because like SGA could have a game where he just backpacks because, he's a top 5 guy.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Rockets, you're probably more than likely going to need at least a few guys to come along for the ride. And, you know, again, like Şengün's got the size. Right? I mean, Hartenstein's a big guy, right? But they don't really have anybody else that can kind of size-wise really match up with that. But then they have a bunch of perimeter and wing guys that kind of slow down the other Rockets players. So I feel like this could be a scenario where like both teams that lost might get their revenge this time around. And then, you know, OKC over Milwaukee or Milwaukee over OKC. Which one? Because again, like it's another scenario where like OKC's kind of small, but you know, they have a ton of speed that the Bucks I don't think necessarily have. So that could be a defensive problem for Milwaukee, even though like they probably won't be able to stop Giannis.
Yeah.
So we're going with OKC to win it all.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with
Okay.
OKC. I think, you know, that's gonna be the catalyst, I think, for a very bright future for this team. I think they have the personnel. You know, I think Shea and what he's able to do. I don't think the Bucks have the personnel to stop that. Like, I really don't, because I think everybody else is gonna be firing on all cylinders as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I feel like OKC it should be theirs to lose, and I think you know if they can kind of come out on top on this one, you know obviously like we're already pretty sold on them, you know as a legitimate contender, but I think it'll kind of showcase to everyone else like yeah this is not the same team from last year. They have like a real chance of doing something special, just because of the fact that they've got so many pieces to kind of work with.
Yes.
So now we're gonna get into, you know, the news and rumors. We're gonna start with kind of like more of a bigger one. And that's Jimmy Butler, right? So if you hadn't heard, right, and you probably have heard by this point, you know, unless you live under a rock. Jimmy Butler's been in the news recently, right? Shams had put out that he's got some landing spots, right? So now he did dye his hair orange, right, in relation to one of these other teams, but that's not really the focus here. Now, it's kind of funny because Brian Windhorst, right, kind of said that Butler's preference is to probably sign an extension with the Heat. But Shams was putting it out there that, you know, Butler, if he gets moved, here are the teams that he'd be interested in. And he gave 3 teams initially, and it was the Houston Rockets, the Golden State Warriors, and the Dallas Mavericks. And then later on in the day, right, the Shams also put out that his agent also mentioned the Phoenix Suns as a destination, and his agent came in to shut it down, which to me doesn't really mean a whole lot just because like we've seen this situation before, right? Where previous agents will say things and then it doesn't matter. But just in general, just kind of wild. Now, it's a little bit confusing because when you look at some of these teams, the machinations in order to actually get Jimmy Butler onto the team is kind of where I don't really see how that even really works. Like say for the Phoenix Suns, like realistically speaking, they can't really add Jimmy Butler to the team because they can't aggregate contracts because of the fact that they're a second apron team. The only way they could realistically maybe do it is they would have to trade one of their big 3 guys, which okay, maybe it happens, but you know, that's the only way they can do it, right? It's not like you're going to have a core 4 of Booker, Beal, Jimmy and Durant. And then for Dallas it's a little bit difficult. They're in the first apron, but again, when you're in the first apron, just like Miami is, you can't take back more salary than you send out, and it's very difficult to be able to pull off a deal for that. You know, kind of similar with Golden State, they can get there a little bit easier. They'd still have to trade like 4 or 5 guys because Butler makes like 48 million. Houston's the one where like that's the easiest one to pull off because they're not at the first apron. But then you kind of ask yourself the question of like, if you're the Rockets, do you really want to do this? You know, maybe it depends on who you give up. Right? But either way, what do you think of this Butler situation? Because we had kind of gotten some nuggets before that, right? But now it feels like we're hearing more about it compared to what we heard maybe like a week or so ago.
What a freaking debacle. That's all I can really say. You know, I think you want to have the guy because of his talent, you know, and that goes for any team that's interested. I think it's kind of the ramifications going forward because you have to look at his age, you have to look at his lack of availability, you have to look at the durability. That's a huge question mark. And then also the free agency thing. I believe that, you know, he's I think it was what declining the player option or whatever.
He has a player option that he could choose to decline, you know, if he wants an extension, I
Yeah,
guess.
because
Or
that's
he
what.
could accept it.
Yeah, because that's what I think the word on the street is like, yeah, he's declining that. So then you're gonna have to give him a long term contract if you do end up trading for him. And I think that's going to be probably the big question that a lot of these teams have. Is this a long-term investment, or what are we doing here? What's going to be the future plan? So that's kind of the skepticism that I have about it. And, all the report really said was, you know, the Miami Heat have made him available. That's really what's going on. So it's like, still a lot of theory crafting, still a lot of smoke and mirrors, I think. It's not like the Heat said, yeah, he's guaranteed out of here. Like, it's more so this is just rumors. So at the moment, I'm not like, foaming at the mouth or anything like that. I'm not like, I don't have a set destination where I think he's going to go. To me, it's still smoke and mirrors, just more of a rift in the chemistry for the Miami Heat, who've had one of the weirdest seasons, I think.
Yeah, and if you want to know, more about like, the machinations of these trades, there's a guy, Keith Smith of Spot Track, and he kind of put up an article kind of explaining, some of the difficulties of a trade like this, and even like some possible proposed trades where, again, you can kind of see it's a little bit tricky, right? Because say like for Phoenix, Bradley Beal for like Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson, right? For Dallas, it's like PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, Quentin Grimes, Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleba
No,
for
no,
Jimmy
no.
Butler. And then Golden State, it's like Kuminga, Melton, and Wiggins. So that one, and then you need a third team probably to send like a Gary Payton, like another guy. And then for Houston, like I said, they're the one that can do that has the easiest time of pulling off a trade. So, I mean, and that's kind of and that's the part where, again, like you said, it's a little tricky because you do kind of wonder, do some of these younger teams, right, say like a team like Houston, should they go after like an older veteran guy, right? Like, does that even make as much sense as maybe it might have before, right? Compare, with the new CBA, maybe there's some decisions that you might have to make where these guys might just be kind of stuck where they are. I don't know. And like you said, there's a lot to unpack here. It's definitely a debacle. But it also kind of starts with the fact, right, that they were not willing to give Butler a new contract, right, Miami. So that's kind of where the sticking point is, where if they were going to keep him, for sure, they would have probably already given it to him. So
Yep.
that way, like, there's no drama, there's no, anything there. But they haven't. So that at least would open the door of him getting moved. It's just a matter of which of these teams are going to bite. Could there possibly be maybe some other, unexpected team? Because that sometimes happens, right? Where like a team kind of comes out of nowhere, right, and ends up grabbing a guy that we didn't expect, right? I think there's also kind of mention of the Nets, but like I don't know why they would do that. But I mean, I feel like, is there another team? I mean, could a team like the Pacers? I mean, could a team like some of these other, like could a team like Memphis, would they be interested? That's the part where like I do kind of wonder, like, if it's not those teams, could it be another team?
I
Or is
mean,
it probably kind of more relegated to those?
I would like Memphis. That would be the team that I like the most, I think, because that brings that veteran presence, and I think he fits, exactly what Memphis does, year in and year out. So it's like that one is the ideal fit for me. I just don't know how willing they are to do that, because I think they are in need of getting a star, but it does add a little bit more volatility to your lineup as well, because Butler also does miss time.
Yeah, and it's also, again, the 48 million is where
Yeah, it's a lot.
tough
You're gonna have to
part
give up a
too.
lot of assets.
Yeah, and that's the tough part where a lot of these teams, like, you're gonna have to give up a number of guys. And like say like if you're Golden State, right? Like, yeah, okay, Butler would be better than any of the guys you're trading for him.
Sure.
It's just a matter of like, and I think their community, like their fan base is kind of trying to figure out, like, would we rather get him, even though he's an older guy, but he is better than any of the other guys we have outside of Steph? Or do we kind of, again, like we talked about, right? Like go for the depth and things like that. And that's where it can be a little bit tricky.
Because there's no way they can get Jimmy Butler without giving up Wiggins, right?
Pretty much, yeah, because of the
Yeah,
contract.
no, I
Like,
don't know. Like I have to backtrack on that statement that I made earlier. Then I feel like you Wiggins is one of those guys that I'd be reluctant to give up.
yeah, and that's the tough part with a lot of these teams, because even say like a team like Indiana, like I guess they could put together a bunch of guys, but for them, would they even do it? Like
No.
I'm just kind of putting teams in the mix, but of those four teams that were mentioned, I guess Phoenix, Houston, Dallas, Golden State, like which one do we, I feel like Golden State, I guess in theory, like you said, could be the one. But, again, Wiggins is a really good fit, so that might be kind of tough to give up. But Butler is better. But, I don't know. That's the one where, like, and Phoenix, I just don't think will happen. Like, I mean, I could be wrong. Like, maybe they do trade Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler, right? And the fact that even got out is kind of wild. But Houston's the one that like I said, it's the easiest one to pull off. It's just, would they do it? Like, could you actually see the Rockets trading for Jimmy Butler? He is from Houston, if I'm not mistaken, so it'd be a hometown guy. But, like, could you see them pulling that off? And do you even think it would be a good fit? Because I guess that could be your guy that you could turn to late in games, and then the other guys, I guess, in theory, could carry you for most of the other portions.
I mean, it makes sense for this season, but like I said, it's the long term plan
Right.
that doesn't make sense for me. Like I think for this season, yeah, it makes sense to get rid of Jalen Green and bring in a guy like Jimmy Butler. But then long
Yeah.
term, you're just kind of adding, I think, a little bit too much of that veteran presence and leaning on it a little bit too much because you do
Mhm.
have a bunch of significantly, um, you know, older guys on that team. So I think I would prefer to go young and really prioritize their development versus getting over the hump. But I think Jimmy Butler is going to fit the Udoka mold a lot more than a lot of the guys that they're probably going to give up to get Jimmy Butler if this potentially happens. So I kind of like it, but at the same
Mhm.
time, I hate it for the future. I hate it. Like that would be one where
Right.
I would look back on that trade and I would just look at it in disgust. But for this season, it does make sense.
Right, because that's the thing where it's like a team that has like a smaller window that might make a little bit more sense versus like if you're a young team just giving guys up, for potentially like maybe 1 or 2 years,
Yeah.
like, and that's the part where, like you said, I don't know. Like, could he go to any of these teams and play well? Sure. It's like you said, it's after this year, right? When you have to kind of figure out, do we give him a long-term deal? And it could just be 2 years, right? Or 3 years or something. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5 or anything like that. It's just in general. That's just kind of the question, that you got to figure out. And that's the question that, all these teams are going to have to figure out.
Yeah.
And Mark Stein kind of came out with a thing saying the Rockets aren't eyeing a Jimmy trade. And that doesn't mean they aren't. It's just a matter of, again, nobody has to do anything right now, right? Is it possible we may actually see some trades in a week or so? Sure. But it's not necessarily a guarantee. And then of course, Shams, he came out and kind of stood by his reporting right after the agent kind of just came out and just kind of, said, yeah, and just kind of went out and just said a lot of, he had a rant, a pretty significant rant. Not gonna read it, but it just know it's there on X.
Yeah.
Also, for whatever reason, hearing more about like Golden State like trying to acquire LeBron. Now we've also heard other sources saying like, yeah, he wants to remain in LA. He wants to be a Laker, which I actually do believe, right? Like, I'm not saying that he would never entertain going to Golden State, but I actually do believe he would prefer to stay in LA and win. It's just a matter of, again, like, you're not going to be able to win with the current iteration of this roster. So, that's where you're kind of just hoping and praying and waiting and biding your time until they actually do something.
Yeah, I think that's BS. I don't see LeBron going to Golden State.
Yeah, I mean, again, like we had this kind of thing last year, right? Where like the Warriors tried to trade for him, and then I
Yeah.
think they contacted LeBron's camp, and he was like, "Nah, I'm good."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, McCollum and Herb Jones drawing interest. I don't know if they're actually going to trade either of those guys. I feel like McCollum is the one where I think it would make more sense because of his age. Herb Jones, I would personally prefer to keep if I'm New Orleans.
Same.
He's a really good 3-and-D guy on a pretty affordable contract. I mean, I know New Orleans is probably going to try to get busy doing something just because of how disastrous their season has been, right? Like their season is pretty much over. I mean, what is their record at this point? I mean, it's what they're 5-21. So they have so they're one of the worst teams in the NBA. Not all their fault, a ton of injuries, but I think a guy like McCollum, yeah, Herb Jones, like if he was on another team, it would actually be kind of cool to see him, and what he would look like as a defensive swing guy on another team. Like, there was a mention of maybe like Dallas, but again, I don't know how Dallas is going to be able to factor in to some of these discussions because I don't feel like they have a ton to realistically give up at this point. But but I feel like McCollum is the guy where I think that's the one that probably makes the most sense. Because like I'm sure like in terms of like drawing interest, like every team should be interested in Herb Jones,
Hmm.
right? But I don't think New Orleans would actually trade him. I think McCollum is the one that would be more than likely to get moved.
Yeah, Herb Jones is a very long term piece, I think, for that team. I think CJ McCollum in that era has kind of run its course, if you ask me. And bringing in DeJounte Murray, I think, was the first signal of that.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Hawks snub Larry Nance trade interest. We don't need to talk about that. But and then last but not least, um, we talked about teams eyeing Portland players, right? Jeremy Grant, Anthony Simons, Robert Williams, right? Like we've talked about this multiple times where I mean, again, they're all fine. Grant, I don't think has had that great of a season. Simons has been fine. Williams has been fine when he's actually played. If you're a contender or if you're a team interested in making moves, like which of those three guys do you feel like you're the most interested in? Because of the fact that they're all different. One's a guard, another's a wing, the other's a big.
Um, probably probably Simons. I like his game the most, I think, of the three. I think Robert Williams is a little bit too uh he doesn't have a lot of durability, let's just say that, too injury prone. Jeremy Grant, that's an interesting one. I think he has potential to be pretty solid. I just think you're not gonna get the version of him that I think
Right.
you're thinking of. Like if he leaves Portland and goes to a better team, I don't think it's going to look as good. That might be a hot take, but I don't know. Of those three, I think Simons is my guy.
I get what you're saying because it's like in Portland. I think if you're a contending team, you would be hoping to get maybe a version closer to like what he was like maybe in like Philly or Oklahoma City,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where he's more of like a defense, rebounding little things guy, hit an open shot versus like what he's been in Portland. And I guess also what was it, Detroit, right? Where he's
yeah,
been like more first, with the ball in his hands, also doesn't really rebound. Now he's older on like a ridiculous contract, and like that's kind of the problem there, where it's like he's just not. I feel like he's not going to be that type of guy, like on like a really good team, and like that. And he's been on a bad team for so long. Like, what is it going to look like? Not saying that like just because you've been on a bad team, you're automatically going to bring over bad habits, but just in general, I think that one is kind of tricky. Like where I'm kind of with you, where I don't know what version of him you're going to get, and I don't know if the version that you're getting is the one you want.
yeah,
Simons is an explosive scoring guard, but what are you going to get back from him if you're Portland? Because I think he's too good to just kind of be like, yeah, let's just dump him and get nothing, right? And then Robert Williams, I think is again we know a really good shot blocking, rebounding, rangy defensive big, but again the issue for him is he cannot stay healthy,
yeah,
and it would be such a risk to trade for him. But if somebody could get him and actually keep him healthy, he'd be like a really sneaky front court upgrade for pretty much any team. Just because of because again, if you go back and see what he did in Boston, he was pretty good. There, it's just we haven't seen him in a since then, basically, right? Like he barely played last season, and he's kind of played this season. And then again, the moments he's played, he's been good. But you'd like to see more, right? So Portland again, they've been bad with those guys. So it's just a matter of like when do they actually pull off these moves. I think Thibault was another guy that was mentioned, another guy that just can't stay healthy. But if he could be healthy, he could be like a really solid defensive wing for a team. It's just again, can you get this guy to actually play consistently?
yeah.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on the NBA Cup, how it's been going so far. Obviously, by the time we record our next episode, we're going to be about a day or so away from the NBA Cup championship round, right? Because, Saturday will be, the semifinals, right? And then I'm pretty sure that Tuesday will be the final one, right? For the right to win the NBA Cup. That game doesn't count towards your record like the other ones, but it still will be exciting and entertaining. So we appreciate all the support. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next episode.